Hello and welcome back, goats, to the BigBluePurple channel. Recently in 14, I finished leveling my warrior to 90, and I geared it up to 620 with the crafted gear. Having geared up my warrior, it gave me the option to go into a lot of the old Stormblood, Extreme, and Savage content, and actually solo it. Now, this was possible in A Realm Reborn and Heavensward for DPS jobs to just go back and solo a bunch of the Savages and Extremes, but for Stormblood you need a tank because the bosses still pour out a ton of damage. Initially here, my plan was just to go do a bunch of the extreme trials solo to try and get the mounts from Stormblood, but I ended up stumbling upon something I find really enjoyable in this game if you want to do some raiding stuff solo. Most of these Stormblood fights can take between like 10 and 13 minutes to solo, and as a result of this, you end up seeing a lot more mechanics than you might expect. Now, granted, there's still tons of mechanics that you don't see because you need a whole party for those mechanics to like exist, like spread markers, for instance. If there's some sort of spread debuff mechanic, like the fire phase in Chaos, you're not going to really see that because it's just you and you don't need to spread away from anybody. Regardless, though, there's still plenty of mechanics to learn, and if you just go into these fights blind solo, if you're someone like me who didn't start playing until way later than Stormblood and all this content is still kind of alien to you, it can be really fun to just solo blind prog these fights and try to learn these mechanics as they come at you. And this also got me thinking that if you're someone who hasn't touched Savage yet, but you're interested in it, maybe you're just a little bit nervous about joining groups, you don't want to hold other people down or whatever, this might be a pretty good place to start. Obviously, the cons of this are that you're going to learn nothing about team synergy, buff alignment, you probably won't even learn the rotation for your main job if you're not a tank main, stuff like that. There's still tons of extra stuff that isn't going to prepare you for Savage, but it can at least give you that blind prog experience or that prog experience of dying to mechanics, trying to figure out what they do, understanding what they do, and then reaching a new mechanic that you then need to learn. Soloing this stuff can also teach someone who hasn't really raided before the importance of raid food and raid potions, because for a lot of these savage and extreme fights, you need to use potions and food if you want to meet the damage check before seeing Enrage. Chaos and Shinryu were both really good examples of this, where I needed to use potions and food to get the kill and get past Enrage, because the damage checks on these fights were actually pretty damn tough, even at level 90. Now, I did not have best in slot or good melds when I was doing this. If you have both of those things, then these DPS checks will probably be a little bit easier, but even so, it's still very likely you'll need to use pots if you want to meet the damage check. Before making this video, I did Chaos solo as a Savage raid, and then I did Suzaku, Seiryu, Byakuo, and Shinryu for the extremes. All of these fights had their own unique gimmicks and mechanics that I had to get used to before I could clear them, but Shinryu in specific was my absolute favorite, and I think it was also the most difficult of the fights that I attempted. I think what makes Shinryu so specifically interesting is that his mechanics feel really intact despite being a solo fight. Now, granted, I've never done this fight synced, so I imagine there's still lots of stuff that I didn't see. But out of all the solo fights that I did do, this one felt like it had the most mechanics out of any of them that I had to memorize. You see, there's these dragon heads that spawn at 2 points in the fight, and if you don't heal these dragon heads to full, they'll actually fly away and give you a damage down. Now, you obviously can't heal these to full as warrior, but if you use Shake It Off at the right time, it'll actually negate the damage down that these heads are supposed to give you. You can also use Bloodwetting as well if you time it really well. I think this mechanic is really cool and specific because it retains its importance despite being an unsynced run. If these heads just gave you a Vulnup or they just did some raid-wide damage, then you could safely ignore them. But because the DPS check is tight and these damage downs will stop you from killing the boss, you actually need to think about this mechanic and you need to use specific tools to avoid taking the damage downs. This ended up making the learning experience for this fight a lot more fun than I would have expected, because you actually have to get creative with your ability usage. You can't just really brute force this like, the level 50 and 60 unsyncs. The Enrage at the end of Shinryu is also super tense, and I wiped to it several times. You need to destroy both of his wings, get back down, and then finish him off, but if you don't save your cooldowns for this, then you are not going to have enough damage as a warrior to finish off both of these wings and then the boss. This makes you start to have to think about how you want to spend your meter, how you want to hold your meter, but you don't want to overcap on meter, and you don't want to drift your cooldowns. And so there's a lot to think about when it comes to optimization and making sure you can actually get the kill. And these are things that are important to think about in real endgame raiding in this game too. If you were to only try one of the Stormblood extremes solo, I would recommend Shinryu because I think it is without a doubt the most challenging one, there's the most mechanics to learn, and it's just overall such a great time, and it's a super cinematic and awesome fucking boss fight in general. Suzaku is another extreme trial I learned how to solo, and I was actually lucky enough to get the mount from this one on my very first kill. Now, unlike Shinryu, it's pretty easy to actually meet the DPS check on Suzaku I didn't end up seeing in Rage, and I think that's due to the fact that Shinryu's in Rage is tied to the percent of health that he reaches, whereas Suzaku's in Rage is time-based like most in Rages in this game, so you don't see it unless you take 12 minutes on the fight or whatever. Now, even though her damage check is pretty lenient and easy to meet, she does a lot more damage to you than any of the other fights that I solo. This is because her Phantom Flurry gives you a physical vuln up, and this makes her auto attacks completely melt you if you don't use your cooldowns wisely here. I had a lot of fun learning this part as someone who doesn't really play tank, because I've never really been pushed to think about my mitigation, hold my mitigation for certain mechanics, and memorize the fight in such a way that I know when all of these tank busters are going to come out. I've never played tank in any high-end content before outside of this, and it's gotten me a lot more comfortable on the role without even playing with anyone else because I have a much better understanding of how my kit works. I also just really enjoyed the mechanics in Suzaku. I found them quite a bit easier than Shinryu because the symbol mechanic is honestly really simple once you've done it a couple times. It's really satisfying to dodge though despite that, and that's how I feel about this fight in general is a lot of these mechanics are really simple to do, but feel really good to pull off, and they just make you feel I'm doing it right, this is nice, you know? I think if you're looking for an extreme on the easier end of things to dip your toes into for soloing, this is probably the one to go to, because a lot of the mechanics in this fight are really straightforward, and once you see them a couple of times, you'll understand them. There's also no crazy specifics like in Shinryu having to use Shake It Off to deal with the dragon heads or whatever. There's nothing like that in this fight, you just have to use invul at the beginning with the phoenixes, but you figure that out pretty fast when you realize that, oh, all these phoenixes one-shot me. Chaos is the last fight I want to talk about in this video that I soloed, because he had a really fun prog experience due to the way his mechanics work. You see, Chaos has 4 different phases with 4 different sets of mechanics. He has a water phase, an earth phase, a fire phase, and a wind phase. The fun thing about this is that they can come out in different orders every pull. This can make progging this fight a lot of fun actually, because rather than just memorizing the sequence of events that happens, you actually need to have an understanding of how to deal with each of these individual phases. And even though this is a solo unsync, there are still things you need to do to not die during each of these phases. The earth phase here is the most notable to me because he has 2 different ways to one-shot kill you. First of all, he's going to put an earth debuff on you, and to get rid of this debuff, you need to heal yourself to full HP. Thankfully, as warrior, this is incredibly easy, you have so many ways of doing this, but if you don't get yourself to full HP, it's an insta-kill, you are dead. After the earthquake debuff, Chaos is going to mark you for a stack, and then he's going to give you a magic vuln up with this stack. After that, he's going to do Big Bang. And the problem with this is Big Bang is magic damage, and you will get one-shot killed if you don't pop invulnerability. You need to use your invul to survive this. Most of the extremes and savages that you solo have at least one mechanic that you have to invul to get past. You'll learn these pretty quick when you run into mechanics that are one-shot killing you. But usually there's only one tank invul you have to do per fight, and it's not too bad. Overall though, Chaos is a pretty fun experience. I will say, compared to the other fights that we talked about, you can really tell that a lot of mechanics are missing from this one because it's designed around 8 players. I mean, yeah, all of these fights are designed around 8 players, but with Chaos in particular, you can tell that there's a bunch of stuff you're not seeing because people are supposed to have certain debuffs and whatnot. But it's still fun to learn, and the enraged damage check on this fight is super tight in comparison to the other ones. Unlike Shinryu, right, his enrage is tied to a timer, not tied to his health bar, so the fact that you're seeing it already proves that, you're cycling through every mechanic in the fight. But on top of that, I barely killed him before enrage when I finally got him. This was the only Savage fight I did solo so far, but I'm looking forward to trying all of them, specifically X-Death and Kefka, because they're both door bosses and they have 2 phases. I think those will be really intense to solo, because you need to kill the second phase before that timer runs out, or you gotta do it all over again. I'm honestly just so surprised with how much I'm enjoying this content solo, to the point where I was yeah, I want to make a video about this and tell other people about this, so hopefully they can have fun with it too if they're not already. I'm just surprised there's not more people talking about, soloing old content and how fun it can be, because, I feel like a lot of people, when they think of soloing old content, they think of running like Ifrit Extreme for Wondrous Tales, and it takes 6 seconds. But these level 70 fights provide something in a way of a solo challenge that nothing else in the game really does. The only other kind of solo content we have that I can think of is Deep Dungeon, but that's a completely different skill set than this type of thing. You know, it takes me back to Blue Mage and the Masked Carnival. I really like the Masked Carnival because the 3 major boss fights that give titles felt like solo extreme trials, and they were a lot of fun to learn. You know, it seems at this point that Blue Mage has been completely forgotten about and we're never going to see another Masked Carnival stage again, so this is the best we have for now. And I really do think that if you're someone who's looking for like a solo challenge experience, you're not really super, invested in any kind of rewards, and you just want to do something solo that's difficult, this is a great place to get that itch scratched. But yeah, all in all, this is basically just a really long-winded PSA telling you, hey, soloing level 70 content is actually fun. If you have a tank at 90, I totally recommend giving it a shot. And again, if you're someone who hasn't done a lot of raiding, you've never stepped foot into Savage before, or maybe even Current Extreme, you could go ahead and try this first if you want to get an idea of what harder mechanics might look like. That's going to do it for this one though. I just wanted to share this with you guys because I don't know how many people are actually aware of how fun some of these old solos can be. It's a great individual challenge if you don't want to be bound by any group. You don't want to sit in the party finder for any reason. You just want to queue into something and do something alone and challenge yourself. This is a great way to do that. Also, if you have any experience with these solo unsynced Savage and Extreme fights, let me know in the comments which one has been your favorite to learn in prog. Which one was the most difficult for you? I would love to know. Remember to drop a like on the video, but only if you did, and subscribe to the BigBluePurple channel if you're not already. Now go solo some Savage raids and have a good time.